The blood-red sunset cast its dying light on Tabitha Grant's tear-stained face as she knelt on the dusty wooden floor, scrubbing until her fingers bled. At 18, she had never imagined that marriage would mean such cruelty, that the man who had promised to cherish her before God would transform into her tormentor mere hours after their wedding vows. "You missed a spot, wife," Jeremiah Wallace drawled from his seat at the table, boots deliberately tracking more mud across the boards she had just cleaned. His ranch outside Tucumcari, New Mexico territory, was notorious throughout the region, but not for its cattle or horses, for the succession of broken women who had the misfortune of becoming Mrs. Wallace. Tabitha bit her tongue until she tasted blood, knowing that any response would only earn her another bruise to match the yellowing one on her cheek. 3 months into this mockery of a marriage, and she had learned quickly which battles couldn't be won. It was 1872, and her father had arranged the marriage to settle a debt. A debt for which she was now paying with her freedom, her dignity, and pieces of her soul that chipped away with each passing day. "I expect dinner on the table when I return," Jeremiah announced, rising from his chair and adjusting his gun belt. "And you'd better wear something decent. I have business associates coming tonight." The door slammed behind him, and Tabitha allowed herself a moment to breathe. His business associates were typically just as cruel as he was, men who eyed her like she was another commodity to be traded. She gathered her skirts and stood, ignoring the ache in her knees, and moved to prepare the meal he demanded. The Wallace Ranch house was substantial: 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor that spoke of wealth earned through means Tabitha dared not question. The fine furnishings mocked her captivity. Silk curtains and imported rugs surrounded her prison. As Tabitha worked in the kitchen, she caught her reflection in the window glass. Her once vibrant auburn hair hung limp around her gaunt face. Marriage had transformed her from the hopeful daughter of a shopkeeper to a hollow-eyed ghost. She had never been allowed to write to her family after the wedding. Jeremiah had made sure of that, telling her they wanted nothing more to do with her. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention before sunset. Peering through the window, she saw Jeremiah returning with 3 men. But there was a 4th rider hanging back, a stranger she hadn't seen before, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat. Tabitha quickly smoothed her hair and donned the dress Jeremiah insisted she wear for company, cut lower than propriety allowed, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. The men's laughter echoed as they entered, bringing with them the smell of whiskey and tobacco. "Gentlemen," Jeremiah called out, "my wife has prepared us a fine meal." His hand gripped her waist possessively as he introduced her to the men, his fingers digging painfully into her side. "This is my bride, Tabitha. She's still learning her place, but she's coming along." The men laughed, and Tabitha kept her eyes lowered. The stranger was introduced as Hayes Reynolds, a cattleman from Texas looking to expand his business. Unlike the others, he did not leer at her, but offered a respectful nod. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, seemed to see beyond her shabby appearance to something Tabitha herself had forgotten existed. During dinner, she served silently while the men discussed business. She couldn't help but notice Hayes barely touched his whiskey while the others drank heavily. "Wallace," Hayes said, his voice deep but quiet, "I hear you've got some prime grazing land by the creek." "That I do, Reynolds. Got it for a steal, too," Jeremiah boasted, already slurring his words. Hayes's eyes briefly met Tabitha's as she refilled water glasses. "And is everything on your property acquired so advantageously?" Something in his tone made Jeremiah narrow his eyes, but he was too deep in his cups to detect the subtle challenge. As the evening progressed, the men moved to the parlor for cards. Tabitha retreated to the kitchen to clean, grateful for the momentary escape. She was startled when Hayes appeared in the doorway. "Pardon me, Mrs. Wallace. I was looking for some water." Tabitha hurried to pour him a glass. When she handed it to him, he deliberately let his fingers brush against hers. "Are you well, madam?" he asked softly. The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly undid her. No one had asked about her welfare in months. "I am as well as can be expected, Mr. Reynolds," she answered carefully, aware that Jeremiah could appear at any moment. Hayes nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the fading bruise on her cheek that her hair couldn't quite conceal. Sometimes situations that seem inescapable have doors we cannot yet see. Before she could respond, he returned to the parlor, leaving Tabitha puzzled by his cryptic words. The card game grew rowdy as the night wore on. Jeremiah, fueled by whiskey and early losses, began betting recklessly. Tabitha, forced to remain in the parlor to serve drinks, watched with growing dread as her husband's mood darkened. "Let's make this interesting," one of the men suggested. "Wallace, you've lost most of your cash. What else you got to wager?" Jeremiah's eyes slid to Tabitha, a cold calculation in them that sent shivers down her spine. "I've got my wife's jewelry. Wedding gift from her father." Tabitha's breath caught. The pearl necklace was the last connection to her family, a treasured heirloom passed down through generations. "Tabitha," Jeremiah barked, "fetch your pearls." Her legs felt like lead as she moved toward their bedroom, tears threatening to spill. She returned with the necklace clutched in trembling hands. "That's hardly enough for the pot," another man commented, eyeing her rather than the pearls. Jeremiah's laugh was ugly. "Well then, perhaps a night with my bride might interest you gentlemen more." The room went silent. Tabitha felt the floor sway beneath her feet, her vision tunneling to pinpoints of light. "I believe," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "That's my cue to retire for the evening. Such wagers don't interest me." He stood, his imposing height seeming to fill the room. "Perhaps we could continue our business discussions tomorrow, Wallace, when heads are clearer." Jeremiah's face flushed with anger. "You turning down my hospitality, Reynolds?" "Not at all. I'm simply suggesting we conduct business when business is all that's on the table." Hayes tipped his hat to Tabitha. "Mrs. Wallace, thank you for your hospitality. The meal was excellent." After Hayes left, Jeremiah's rage found its target in Tabitha. "You think you're too good for my friends?" Batting your eyes at that Texas man. She backed away, knowing what was coming. "No, Jeremiah." The back of his hand connected with her face, sending her sprawling. "Get out of my sight. I'll deal with you later." Tabitha fled to the kitchen, her cheek throbbing. Outside the window, she could see Hayes mounting his horse, but instead of riding off, he circled around toward the back of the property. The card game continued without her, growing louder as more whiskey was consumed. Eventually, the men passed out in the parlor, including Jeremiah, who had drunk himself into a stupor after losing heavily. Tabitha crept to her small cot in the storage room. Jeremiah had banned her from the main bedroom weeks ago, saying she didn't deserve a real bed. She curled into a ball, wondering how much longer she could survive this existence. A soft tapping at the window startled her. Hayes Reynolds' face appeared in the glass, his finger to his lips. Tabitha hesitated, then cautiously opened the window. "Mrs. Wallace," he whispered, "I've been observing your situation. I can help you leave, but we must go now while they're unconscious." Terror and hope warred within her. "Leave? But he'll come after me, he'll kill me." "Not if he can't find you." Hayes's expression was solemn. "I know people in Santa Fe who can help, but we have to go now." Tabitha glanced back at the door, knowing what awaited her when Jeremiah woke. "I have nothing to take with me. You won't need anything where we're going. Just yourself." With shaking hands, Tabitha gathered her courage and climbed through the window. Hayes helped her onto his horse, and they rode away from the ranch under the cover of darkness. They traveled through the night, Hayes keeping them off the main trails. Tabitha clung to his back, expecting at any moment to hear Jeremiah's enraged shouts behind them. But there was only the sound of hoofbeats and the whisper of the wind. As dawn broke over the New Mexico landscape, Hayes finally slowed their pace. They stopped by a small creek, and he helped her down from the horse. "You should rest," he said, his voice gentle. "We've put good distance between us and the ranch, but we need to keep moving soon." Tabitha sank down on a rock, the reality of her situation settling in. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Reynolds? You don't know me." Hayes knelt by the creek, filling his canteen. "I've seen too many women treated as property, not people. No one deserves what he was doing to you." He handed her the canteen. "And I'm not actually a cattleman." She took a careful sip. "Then what are you?" "U.S. Marshal. Hayes Reynolds is my name, but I've been investigating Jeremiah Wallace for months. He's involved in rustling, among other crimes. I was there to gather information, not to witness." He trailed off, his expression darkening. "You're a lawman?" Hope flickered in her chest. "Then you can arrest him." Hayes sighed. It's not that simple. The men he works with have connections. And marriage. He hesitated. The law tends to look the other way when it comes to how a man treats his wife. The flicker of hope died. So he can still come after me. Not if Tabitha Wallace disappears completely. Hayes looked at her intently. Would you consider taking a new name? Becoming someone else? Tabitha stared at him. Is that even possible? With the right help, yes. He stood, offering her his hand. We need to reach Santa Fe. I have friends there, a mission run by Sisters of Charity. They've helped women in your situation before. Tabitha accepted his hand, rising to her feet. I don't know how to thank you. Live free, Hayes said simply. That's thanks enough. They continued their journey, stopping only when necessary. Hayes shared his provisions and his coat when the desert night turned cold. He kept their conversation light, telling her stories about his childhood in Texas, never pressing her to speak of her own past. By the second day, Tabitha found herself watching Hayes when he wasn't looking, the careful way he treated his horse, the respectful distance he maintained from her, the quiet strength in his hands as he built their small fires. He was nothing like Jeremiah or the men her father had introduced her to. The mission is just beyond that ridge, Hayes said late on the third day, pointing to the horizon. Sister Maria will help you start fresh. And what will happen to you? Tabitha asked, surprised by the pang she felt at the thought of his departure. I'll continue my investigation. Wallace needs to be brought to justice, but it has to be done legally. As they approached the mission, Tabitha saw a cluster of simple adobe buildings surrounding a small chapel. A garden flourished against all odds in the arid landscape, tended by women in plain dresses. Sister Maria greeted them at the gate, her weathered face kind but shrewd as she assessed Tabitha's condition. Another one, Marshal Reynolds? She needs sanctuary, sister, and a new identity. The nun nodded. Come, child. You're safe here. Tabitha dismounted, then turned to Hayes. Will I see you again? Something flashed in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or something deeper. It's better if you don't. Safer for you that way. She nodded, fighting back tears she hadn't expected. Thank you, Marshal. For my life. Hayes tipped his hat. Be well, Mrs. He stopped. You're not Mrs. Wallace anymore. Sister Maria will help you choose who you want to be now. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Tabitha to watch until he disappeared into the distance. The mission became Tabitha's sanctuary. Sister Maria helped her heal both physically and emotionally, never pushing for details, but always ready to listen when Tabitha needed to speak. The other women at the mission, each with her own story of escape, became a surrogate family. They taught her to garden, to weave, to find strength in quiet moments. Have you thought about your new name? Sister Maria asked one evening as they sat shelling peas. Tabitha considered. I'd like to keep my first initial, to remember who I was. That's wise. Our past shapes us, even when we must leave it behind. Thea, Tabitha said suddenly. Thea Blackburn. The name felt right on her tongue, similar enough to remember, different enough to hide. Sister Maria smiled. Thea Blackburn it is. Tomorrow we'll begin the paperwork. Days turned to weeks at the mission. Thea learned that several of the women were not nuns at all but, like her, refugees from violent marriages or other dangerous situations. The mission served as a waypoint, helping them establish new identities before moving on to new lives. News occasionally reached them from Tucumcari. Jeremiah Wallace was searching for his wife, offering rewards for information. But no one connected the missing Tabitha Wallace to Thea Blackburn, who kept her hair covered and stayed within the mission walls. Nearly 2 months after her arrival, Sister Maria came to Thea with a letter. It's from Marshal Reynolds, she explained. He asked me to give it to you once everything was arranged. Thea's heart quickened as she broke the seal. Miss Blackburn, your new documents are complete. Sister Maria has connections who have created a history for Thea Blackburn, a young widow from Missouri, seeking a fresh start in the West. The documents are legal in every way that matters. Wallace continues to search, but his attention is divided. The investigation into his criminal activities progresses. You should be safe to leave the mission soon, should you choose to do so. I find myself thinking of your courage often. May your new life bring you the peace and freedom you deserve. Respectfully, H.R. Thea folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her heart. She had thought of Hayes often, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way his eyes had seemed to see her true self even when she had forgotten it existed. "Sister Maria, where will I go when I leave here?" she asked that evening. "Where would you like to go?" "The mission has connections in several towns." Thea hesitated. "I have skills as a shopkeeper's daughter. I can keep accounts, manage inventory." "There's a mercantile in Silver City looking for help," Sister Maria suggested. "The owner is a widow herself, understands discretion." Silver City was far enough from Tucumcari to be safe, yet still within New Mexico territory. That sounds perfect. Arrangements were made, and a week later, Thea Blackburn boarded a stagecoach bound for Silver City. She carried some clothing provided by the mission, her new papers, and Hayes's letter tucked safely in her pocket. Mrs. Eleanor Porter, the mercantile owner, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who asked few questions. She provided Thea with a small room above the shop and fair wages. Life in Silver City developed a comfortable rhythm. Thea proved herself capable at the mercantile, and gradually Mrs. Porter trusted her with more responsibility. The town was growing, with the silver mines attracting new residents daily. Thea made acquaintances, though she kept a careful distance, always aware that her past could catch up to her. She declined the attentions of several miners and a persistent banker, not yet ready to trust any man after her experience with Jeremiah. 6 months passed. The nightmares that had plagued her at the mission grew less frequent. Her face filled out as regular meals restored her health, and her hair, now worn in a simple but elegant style, regained its auburn luster. On a brisk autumn morning, Thea was arranging a new shipment of fabric when the shop bell jingled. She looked up with her practiced shopkeeper's smile, which froze when she saw who had entered. Hayes Reynolds stood just inside the doorway, his hat in his hands. He looked tired, with a new scar along his jawline, but his blue eyes were just as she remembered. "Miss Blackburn," he said formally, though his voice held warmth. "I hope I'm not intruding." Thea gripped the counter for support. "Marshal Reynolds. This is unexpected." Mrs. Porter emerged from the back room, assessed the situation with a knowing glance, and announced she had errands to run. When they were alone, Hayes stepped closer. "You look well. The new name suits you." "Thank you." Thea struggled to maintain her composure. "What brings you to Silver City?" "Official business, in part." He placed his hat on the counter. "Jeremiah Wallace was arrested last week. Cattle rustling, land fraud, and other charges. He'll be going to prison for a long time." Relief washed over Thea like a cool rain. "So it's over?" "Almost." Hayes met her eyes steadily. "There's the matter of his marriage. In the eyes of the law, Tabitha Wallace still exists as his wife." Thea's stomach clenched. "I can't go back. I won't." "You misunderstand me," Hayes said quickly. "I've brought annulment papers, signed by a judge who owes me a favor. He's agreed to process them quietly, with no questions asked. Tabitha Wallace will legally cease to exist, freeing Thea Blackburn completely." Tears sprang to Thea's eyes. "You did that for me. It was the right thing to do." Hayes hesitated. "But I confess I had personal reasons as well." "Personal reasons?" Hayes took a deep breath. "I've thought about you. Often. Too often for a marshal who's supposed to maintain professional distance." He met her gaze directly. "I wanted to make sure you were truly free before I asked if I might call on you properly, Miss Blackburn." Thea's heart raced. "Call on me. If that would be welcome," he added quickly. "I understand if after what you've endured, you might not wish for any man's attentions." "Your attentions are not unwelcome," Thea said softly. "But I'm still finding my way as Thea Blackburn." Hayes nodded. "I respect that. I'm in Silver City for a week on assignment. Perhaps we could begin with dinner? At the hotel restaurant, in public view. No obligations." Thea considered his offer. This man had saved her, given her a new life, and now offered her the choice she'd been denied before. "I would like that, Marshal Reynolds." "Hayes," he corrected with a small smile. "Just Hayes, when it's only us." Their dinner that evening was unlike any experience Thea had known. Hayes treated her with a deference that acknowledged her as an equal, not a possession. He asked about her life at the mercantile, sharing his own stories of growing up on a small ranch outside Austin. "My father taught me that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he owned, but by how he treated those with less power than himself," Hayes explained. "I saw too many men who didn't learn that lesson." "Like Jeremiah," Thea said quietly. Hayes nodded. "Men like him are why I became a marshal." But sometimes the law doesn't protect those who need it most. So you work outside it? Like you did with me. I work within its spirit, if not always its letter. His expression grew serious. I want you to know that what I did helping you escape, creating your new identity, I'd do it again. But I also want you to understand that I never intended to. That is, I had no expectations regarding me. Thea finished for him, a smile tugging at her lips. It was endearing to see the confident Marshal flustered. Yes, I helped you because it was right, not to earn your regard. Yet you have it nonetheless, Thea said softly. Over the following days, Hayes called on Thea regularly. They took walks through Silver City, dined together, and gradually, Thea shared more of her experience at the Wallace Ranch. Hayes listened without judgment, his quiet anger directed at Jeremiah, never at her. I believed I deserved it for a time, Thea admitted during a sunset walk. That I had failed somehow as a wife. You deserved none of it, Hayes said firmly. The failure was his, not yours. On his last evening in Silver City, Hayes invited Thea for a ride into the foothills. They stopped at a vista overlooking the town, the setting sun painting the desert in gold and crimson. I have to leave tomorrow, Hayes said as they sat on a flat rock. There's rustling activity near the border that needs attention. Thea nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. When will you return? I don't know. That's the nature of my work. He took her hand gently. But I would like to write to you, if you're agreeable. I would like that very much. Hayes seemed to gather his courage. Thea, I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your resilience. I find myself thinking of you constantly. He lifted her hand to his lips. I know it's too soon for promises, but I want you to know that my feelings run deeper than admiration. Thea's heart pounded. I've been afraid to acknowledge my own feelings. After Jeremiah, I thought I might never trust again. I would never ask for your trust without earning it, Hayes said earnestly. If you'll allow me, I'd like the chance to prove myself worthy of it. In the fading light, Thea made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. Hayes remained perfectly still for a moment, then returned the kiss with tender restraint. When they parted, his eyes were bright with emotion. I'll come back to you, Thea Blackburn. You have my word. Hayes departed the next morning, leaving Thea with the annulment papers and a promise to write. Her new life continued at the Mercantile, but now she had his letters to anticipate. Hayes wrote faithfully tales of his travels across the territory, careful accounts of his work that omitted the more dangerous details, and increasingly, expressions of his growing feelings for her. Thea kept every letter, responding with stories of Silver City and her own cautious admissions of affection. Through their correspondence, they built a foundation of friendship and understanding that Tabitha and Jeremiah had never had. 3 months after his visit, Hayes returned to Silver City unexpectedly. Thea was closing the Mercantile when he appeared at the door, trail-worn but smiling. Hayes, she exclaimed, hurrying to unlock the door. He stepped inside, hat in hand. I couldn't stay away any longer. That evening, over dinner, he explained his presence. I've been offered a position as sheriff in Mesilla. It would mean a more settled life, less traveling. Thea's pulse quickened. You're considering it? I am. Especially if. He hesitated. Especially if you might consider Mesilla as a place to continue your fresh start. The implication was clear. Are you asking me to move to Mesilla, Hayes Reynolds? I'm asking if you might consider a future that includes me, he said solemnly. Not now, perhaps. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. Thea reached across the table for his hand. I've been ready since you rode away 3 months ago. That night, walking back to the Mercantile under a canopy of stars, Hayes knelt in the dusty street. Thea Blackburn, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not out of obligation or necessity, but because you choose to? Tears filled Thea's eyes. Yes, because I choose to. Because I love you. When Hayes kissed her, Thea felt the last shadows of Tabitha Wallace's pain begin to fade. They were married 2 weeks later in Silver City's small church, with Mrs. Porter and Sister Maria, who had traveled from Santa Fe as witnesses. Thea wore a simple blue dress that complemented Hayes's eyes. Their vows were traditional but carried deeper meaning for both of them, promises of respect, partnership, and freedom within their bond. Hayes's voice was steady as he pledged to honor and cherish her all his days. After the ceremony, they departed for Mesilla, where Hayes had secured a small house on the outskirts of town. It was modest compared to the Wallace Ranch, but to Thea, it represented something the grand house never had, a true home. The citizens of Mesilla welcomed Sheriff Reynolds and his bride. Thea found work at the local school, teaching reading and arithmetic to the town's children. Her nightmare-free nights increased, and when memories of Jeremiah did surface, Hayes's gentle presence helped chase them away. Thea Blackburn Reynolds bloomed in her new life. The timid woman who had escaped the Wallace Ranch grew confident, respected for her intelligence and compassion. Hayes watched her transformation with pride, always careful to give her the space and independence she needed. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, arrived a year after their wedding. Hayes wept when he held his son for the first time, promising the infant a life filled with love and respect. "He has your eyes," Thea whispered as they marveled at their creation. "And your courage, I hope," Hayes replied, kissing her forehead. As Thomas grew, Jeremiah Wallace became nothing more than a distant shadow. News reached them that he had died in prison, but the information caused barely a ripple in Thea's peaceful existence. For years into their marriage, as they sat on their porch watching Thomas chase fireflies in the twilight, Hayes turned to his wife. "Are you happy, Thea Reynolds?" She leaned against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. You didn't just give me a new name, Hayes. You helped me find myself." He wrapped his arm around her, his hand resting protectively over her swelling belly where their second child grew. "You found yourself, Thea? I just offered a door, and I chose to walk through it." She smiled up at him. "The best choice I ever made." Thomas ran to them, clutching a jar of glowing insects. "Look, Mama. Papa. I caught the stars." Hayes lifted his son onto his lap. "Those aren't stars, son. Stars are much too far away to catch." "Like Mama was?" Thomas asked innocently, repeating a story he'd heard. Hayes met Thea's eyes over their child's head, love shining in his gaze. "Yes, like Mama was. But some journeys, no matter how far, are worth making." Thea reached for her husband's hand, thinking of all they had overcome. From Tabitha Grant to Tabitha Wallace to Thea Blackburn to Thea Reynolds, each name had been a chapter in her story. But it was Hayes who had given her the freedom to write the ending herself. Their second child, a daughter named Hannah, arrived that winter, completing their family. As Thea watched Hayes rock their infant daughter while helping Thomas with his letters, she silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought the Marshal to Jeremiah Wallace's poker game that night years ago. The town of Mesilla grew around them, and the Reynolds family grew with it. Hayes served as sheriff for 15 years before retiring to focus on the small ranch they had built outside town. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a lawyer dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Hannah, with her mother's spirit and her father's sense of justice, became a teacher like Thea. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Hayes presented Thea with a journal bound in soft leather. "For your stories," he explained. "The ones you tell the children, about the brave people who find their way home." Thea had begun writing tales for their children and others in town, stories of courage and second chances, of women who rescued themselves with a little help from unexpected allies. "I never thought I'd have stories worth telling," she said, running her fingers over the journal's cover. "You've always had them," Hayes replied, taking her hand. The years had silvered his hair at the temples, but his eyes remained as blue and steady as the day he'd helped her through that window. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were a woman with stories inside her, waiting for the chance to speak." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Thea whispered, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the Wallace Ranch that night?" Hayes pulled her closer. "I try not to think about it, but I know I would have found you somehow. Some souls are meant to find each other, no matter what stands in their way." "Is that what we are? Souls meant to find each other?" "Without a doubt," he murmured against her hair. "How else do you explain a marshal and a shopkeeper's daughter crossing paths at exactly the right moment? Divine intervention?" Thea suggested with a smile. "Or perhaps just love, finding its way home." As they drifted to sleep, Thea reflected on her journey. The frightened bride forced to serve a cruel man had become a woman of strength and purpose. The cowboy who had set her free had become the center of a life she had built on her own terms. And the new name he had given her had become not a disguise, but her true identity: Thea Reynolds, wife, mother, teacher, storyteller. In the years that followed, when travelers passed through Messia and remarked on the evident love between the retired sheriff and his wife, Thea would share a knowing smile with Hayes. Their story had begun in darkness, but had found its way to light, a testament to the power of freedom, second chances, and the courage to begin again. Their children and eventually their grandchildren grew up hearing stories of brave women and honorable men, of justice prevailing and love conquering fear. What they didn't know was that the greatest story of all was the one their family lived every day, a story of redemption that had started on a blood-red evening when a marshal named Hayes Reynolds had offered his hand to a woman who needed to become someone new. Tabitha Grant had disappeared. Mrs. Wallace was no more. But Thea Reynolds had found her home, her voice, and her happily ever after, not given to her by any man, but claimed by her own brave heart.